At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu. With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Today on the podcast, I'm thrilled to be joined by Juhea Kim to discuss her latest novel, City of Nightbirds, which was published by One World in the UK earlier this year and is also available in the US, Canada, Australia, Korea, Russia, and soon to be Italy too. Described by Coco Mellors as a rare jewel of a novel, City of Nightbirds was also chosen as a Reese's Book Club pick. Juhea Kim is a writer based in London. She was born in South Korea and raised in Portland, Oregon. Juhea graduated from Princeton University with a degree in art and archaeology, and her writing has been published across numerous publications, including Granta, Times Literary Supplement, The Independent, and more. Her international best-selling debut novel, Beasts of a Little Land, was published in 2021. It won the Yasnaya Polyana Award, the largest annual literary prize in Russia, awarded by the Leo Tolstoy Museum Estate. It was also a finalist for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize and is currently being adapted for television. Juhea is also the founder and editor of Peaceful Dumpling, an online magazine covering sustainable lifestyle and ecological literature. Here to chat about her latest book, City of Nightbirds, welcome Juhea to A Pair of Bookends.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Hannah.
I am so happy to have you here. I was just saying to you that I was up very late finishing this book and I absolutely loved it. There was so much about it that resonated with me. But before we get into your book, I have to ask my favourite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
So what I am just now reading is a literary magazine published in Korea. So I don't think this is widely available in the UK, but I love staying abreast of the literary movements in Korea. I'm, of course, fluent in both languages, so I have a crossover literary life. But what's available in the UK, or what will soon be available that I just finished, is Jin Woo Chung's Oxford Soju Club. And it's a debut novel, and as you can guess from the name, it's based in Oxford, England, and it's a really introspective, thoughtful spy thriller. So it's a literary thriller along the lines of The Sympathizer or more cerebral philosophical novels. And it's about identity and being an immigrant, and it's asked the question of whether you truly have the ability to determine your own identity in the world that constantly asks you to be one or the other.
That sounds amazing.
I highly recommend it. And I read it in galley form, so I think it will be published later this year in US, Canada, and the UK. And in terms of films, I recently watched The Sinners, which is the film that everyone's talking about. I thought it was really funny at times. And I also recently watched Out of Africa, which is not very recent at all. I saw that it was leaving Netflix soon, so I always try to get those before they leave. And I had a lot of apprehensions about it because at the time when it came out in 1980s, it received a lot of awards, including the Oscars, and it has Meryl Streep and Robert Redford in it, and it's considered a classic. However, half century later, I already knew going in that it was going to have heavy white gaze, white savior complex, and a lot of things that are outdated in conversations around race and colonialism. However, However, while I did see those things that did bother me, I thought that the film overall had a lot of emotional truths that's relevant 50 years on. So I thought it was actually a very beautiful love story if you focus on the emotional narrative arc. So I highly recommend that if you're in the mood for a classically beautiful film with beautiful cinematography and well-written script that you don't see very often nowadays.
I love that. Those are so many great recommendations. I was also obsessed with Sinners and watched that recently myself. It's such a great film, and the entire cast of that film were just amazing, and the music in that film.
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness.
So
I
good.
thought Sammy, who played the preacher's son, preacher boy,
Yes.
I could not believe that this was his first role, but that's what
Yes.
happens. These breakout actors, they just amaze you with
Yeah.
no experience. So he's a born performer, obviously. And I was not previously a Michael B. Jordan fan. I just didn't have much connection to him.
Yeah.
But after seeing this film, I really thought that he's an actor with so many facets and depth
Yeah.
to be able to play this role with both humor and charisma and like the raw evilness at times because he turns and he becomes evil as without spoilers, I can say. So I was really impressed, as you said.
Yeah,
by
me too. I've been a fan of his work for a long time, and I think his collaboration with Ryan Coogler is incredible. They've done so many wonderful things together. I think I was quite traumatized at university when I watched Fruitvale Station. I don't know if you've seen that film, but it's a true story and it's really haunting. But the way that they portrayed that on screen is just so incredible. And yeah, I've been a big fan of anything they do together. So I was really excited for this, and they did not disappoint. So it's a great recommendation. But we are here to talk about your book, so let's get into that. Now, I want to ask you, first of all, because you did have huge success with your debut novel, and you are, of course, experiencing the same success, in my opinion, with your second novel. But how did you feel working on this book? Did you feel kind of much pressure around it because of the success of your debut? What was that like?
I didn't feel that much pressure then. I think I am feeling the post-success pressure and anticipation now for my third book. However, at the time, I wrote this City of Nightbirds book in a state of complete ecstasy, and I was absorbed in it, and I was so happy to be immersed in the question of beauty. So the way this went was during the entire time I was drafting City of Nightbirds, I was also promoting my first book. So I would be called to do publicity here, publicity there. But when I was home, when I could focus for stretches of time, all I did was write about ballet or practice ballet in my living room. Or, eventually as the COVID restrictions went away, I could go to a studio. So practicing ballet, writing about it, listening to music of all forms, opera, symphonies, concertos, or reading books about beauty. So this was an entirely aesthetic experience. And I was, of course, watching a lot of performances. There are a lot of performances, of course, because these dancers dance every week. But there are certain historic performances that are called, quote unquote, reference performances. And these are the iconic nights that the future generations will look back. They'll find VHS or DVD or, in the annals of YouTube and study them and then use them to guide their own future interpretations. So I was watching these iconic performances by dancers from a half century ago that still amaze us with their advanced artistry and technique today. Like no one has surpassed them now. And this gave me such a feeling of certainty while writing this book that I couldn't have had while writing Beasts of a Little Land. My conditions for writing Beasts of a Little Land was completely different. I was fighting a lot of elemental difficulties. I was living in New York at the time while writing Beasts of a Little Land and living on the top floor of a walk-up, and it was extremely hot, no air conditioning. New York is very different from London. It's a lot hotter and more humid, and I was exhausted every single moment I was writing Beasts of a Little Land. Whereas with City of Nightbirds, I was just in the embrace of this idea of art and ballet. So So it was happy time for me.
Oh, I'm so glad. I would love to know where your interest in ballet or in the world of dance began.
I started taking ballet lessons when I was 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
And that's also when I started playing the cello. So my training in classical music and dance started at the same age, and it continued throughout high school, through uni. And I actually danced a lot in university, although I was not a dance major, but I danced a lot of ballet. And I even went to a pre-professional summer intensive at Korea's second most prestigious company. It's sort of, I guess it's like Royal Ballet and English National Ballet are sort of the two top companies in the UK. And I went to the equivalent of one of those pre-professional summer intensive when I was 14 going on 15. And I was, of course, passionate enough to pursue that. And then when I went there, I realized, oh, I am the worst student here. And this sounds like an exaggeration, but it was not. It took about half the class to make me realize I am literally the worst person here. And it was a shock to me because I was always naturally very good at school. But in dance, while I had the passion and the will, I did not have the ability. So I could only continue dancing ballet whilst knowing that I was never going to be a professional dancer. And after I graduated from uni, of course, I started working in a variety of fields. Pretty quickly, though, I fell into publishing. I started working in the editorial department of one of the New York publishers. And during that time, I didn't dance at all. And during the pandemic, I saw that all these ballet companies around the world were offering free online classes. And that's when my love and interest in ballet was rekindled. And around the same time, my editor asked, what do you want to write your next novel about? And I immediately knew it had to be about ballet because it was actually a through line for most of my life. And I felt that I had to give it up because I was not a natural dancer. But when I actually went back to it around 2020, I realized that my time away from it had actually made me a better dancer because I had matured as a human being. It had nothing to do with the fact that my body had become better, but it was that I knew who I was, and that directly translates to how you can move your body.
Yeah.
So that became the moment when I came back to dance and started writing about dance.
I love that so much. It's so amazing that you've returned to it. I used to dance when I was younger, and I danced from when I was 3 until I was 21, and then I haven't danced since, and I'm 30 now, and it feels like a real loss to not be doing that anymore. And life gets busy, and it is what it is, but it is something that it's such a beautiful thing to do, and it creates this really kind of intimate relationship with your body. And I just really loved reading about that in this book, that relationship with the body. And I do have a question about that later, but I think firstly, could you tell the listeners what City of Nightbirds is about?
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu. At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
City of Nightbirds follows a principal dancer named Natalia. Once a world-renowned ballerina and the best in her generation, she suffers a devastating accident and leaves the stage too early in her career. But we follow her as she returns to her hometown of St. Petersburg, and she receives an unexpected offer to return to the stage in her iconic role of Giselle. We will meet her friends and foes in her old city, and as she encounters these ghosts from her past, we will find out whether she will find her love and her redemption.
You described that perfectly without giving any spoilers. But for the listeners, you do need to read this book so that you can fully enjoy the experience. It is such a wonderful book. And please do come and talk to us after you've read it so that we can speak about the spoilers in the book. Now, I I would like to know what the inspiration was, first of all, behind your protagonist, Natalia Leonova, who I found completely fascinating as a character. I think she's so complex and has so many layers, and she takes dedication and sacrifice, which is often found in the world of ballet, but she takes those things to a whole new level. And she wants to be the very best, which is quite a normal thing in any creative's life, but it just feels that that's an especially important thing for her. So what was the inspiration for her character?
The main inspiration for her character was myself. And when I have said this in the past in an event on the UK launch date, a true fan of this book and the previous book, The Waterstones manager, he went like this and he asked me, he looked at me like, oh no. Why? Because Natasha is a good character, no? But he seemed to think that this crazy character, this too intense character was actually based on myself, was like alarming in some way. Natasha's drive, her sacrifice for her art was so easy for me to write because I just needed to reflect on what I had to give up and what that process was and what I earned from it and what I lost from it. So I mentioned to you this blissful state that I was writing in. It was very cathartic because I could just think about what had happened to me, and there was not a lot of brainstorming. It was just, this is simply how it happened, but in dance and not in literature. Of course, I took a lot of notes from watching performances of some of the best dancers of past and present generations, and I did not look too deeply into the private lives of any single dancer because I have the highest respect for all these artists, and I don't want to mine their private lives and put it into my book. It seems very disrespectful. However, I did relentlessly watch their performances and try to imagine what kind of a person would dance that way. And that personality would just be very easy to pour into this book. When I watch a dancer perform Giselle or Le Corsaire or La Bayadère, their personalities come through so much. And in fact, what you see isn't just choreography, but who they are as human beings. And that's what mesmerizes you. I think the same thing happens with books, actually, which is probably why I'm not very attracted to emotionally distant books, because certain books put a great deal of distance between the book and the reader.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of those. I'm a real big fan. Actually, the only type of books that I am interested in at this point in my life is books that are so real that they could bleed. And it might be a gruesome image, but that's how much vitality and the soul of the artist has to be in there for me to believe it and for me to fall in love with it. So yeah, that's sort of what inspired the person of Natasha. And she is not based on a single ballerina, even though her first name and her bravura technique and her jumps and her turns will remind you of a certain very famous iconic dancer if you follow ballet. But I really took her from a variety of dancers. However, the male dancers, the male leads in this pas de trois of a novel, Dimitri and Sasha, were more directly influenced by two different male dancers. Dimitri was really inspired by someone who's actually living. And again, I did not mind his private life, but he's also a very colorful character. So there were a lot of things that were available for me to take, even though they were not super private. I will not mention his name because he's still living. Sasha, who is this explosive and very beautiful, blonde, tall dancer who is sort of considered ballet's rock star, he was inspired by Alexander Godunov. Alexander Godunov was a Soviet ballet dancer who defected to the US, and he was actually kind of a friend slash rival of Baryshnikov, who's much more well known. But Baryshnikov also is a short dancer, whereas Alexander Nikulin was extremely handsome and tall, even when he wasn't dancing. Baryshnikov was very charismatic when he was dancing, I believe, and I think Godunov was beautiful and attractive all the time. And I took this image of a rebellious blonde dancer from Godunov, and I think that will be very exciting for you to read and also find some of his clips online and compare.
Yeah, for sure. I just found all of these characters so fascinating, and I think It's so interesting, isn't it, to see the almost divide between the performer self and who they are as a person, and also the kind of fusing together of those things, because you do have to, as a performer, you do have to kind of separate yourself sometimes, but it's so hard to do that. And it's so interesting to see what that person gives in a performance, and like you said, kind of noticing things about their performance that are directly inspired by things they've experienced in their personal life. I want to ask you, because her relationship with her mum is quite a fraught one. I know that her mum hits her as a child, but it's not, I don't know, it's difficult to talk around that because her mum does hit her as a child, but it doesn't seem to be like a consistent physically abusive relationship. It's just a fraught one. And all she ever wants from her mum is her mum's validation, until she kind of moves away and sort of tires from asking her mum to come and visit. How do you think that relationship shaped Natasha?
I do want to mention first that in this cultural context, when Natasha is growing up in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s in USSR, it's a different time. And in that
Yes.
cultural context, it was very common for parents to use physical punishment. I think that that's very different now.
Yes,
But
yeah.
in the day, they would not have considered that like child abuse and child services
No.
has to take away Natasha. However, it very much informs their relationship, why she doesn't feel completely at ease with her mother throughout her life. And I, fortunately, even though so much of Natasha is reflective of my experience, her difficult relationship with her mother is completely the opposite, because I was so lucky in meeting both parents who completely supported my creative career. Natasha's mother is, on the other hand, very doubtful that Natasha will ever achieve success in anything. And I was inspired to create a relationship like this from observation. I have unfortunately seen people who didn't get the love and who didn't get the support from their parents. And it unfortunately, most of the time, leads the child to believe that they can't do that much. Natasha is a very strong and unique character in that people telling her she can't do something actually makes her more determined to overcome that. And that's why her mother telling her she can't be a ballerina actually ends up making her succeed even more.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that was really interesting about her kind of upbringing is it feels like they're from a very different world to the world of ballet, which is kind of catered towards the elite. And as a child, Natasha looks to her friend who is going on these extravagant shopping trips with her mother, and it's quite painful for her to experience this sort of envy, because she's quite a proud character, and you know, she's willing to work hard and stuff, but the cards she's been dealt are just so different from the world of her friend. And there was a moment that you write, within this moment you write, there was only one thing worse than being poor, and that was acting poor, expecting generosity from people who have more. Her upbringing is such a fascinating thing, and I think it is something that is really crucial to her character, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And she realizes early on that something that will help her move on, escape to a bigger and brighter world, is her artistic ability. She recognizes that. And, you know, it's not, again, it's not unrelated to my own experience, because I grew up in the 1990s in Portland, Oregon, back when it was not very sophisticated. And I had no role models who worked full-time as artists, and no one, I didn't realize such a path, like a full-time writer, novelist. I didn't even realize that that was a career, that people could do that. And my friends and I all have very humble upbringings, and I went to uni on the East Coast of America, which has very completely different culture from the West Coast, and it was a culture shock. And I had to try to figure out, am I somebody who would be satisfied staying in that old comfortable world where there is less competition and also less of the drama and the glamour and all these wonderful things that are sort of more in the center of the world's attention? Or am I somebody who wants to cross the boundary? And, you know, I didn't articulate this thought consciously, but I did know that one of the ways that I could do this was to excel. And what I could excel in was writing and literature. literature. These thoughts formed in my head from my early to mid 20s. And that became one of the main drivers to me becoming a novelist. This is quite embarrassing, but I have said this publicly in another interview. And at that time, in my mid to late 20s, 27, 28, I did fall very passionately in love with the guy. And he was, this is so embarrassing.
I love this.
He was an investment banker. He was a finance bro.
Oh.
You can see how this is embarrassing to me in hindsight. And he seemed very cool. And anyway, for a very short and very intense period, I fell deeply in love with him. But he broke my heart, I think, because he deemed that I wasn't good enough, and specifically I wasn't successful enough, because he made a lot more money than I did, and he just was financially a lot more successful than I was. And I know that this played a role because the next person that I saw him with, because we had mutual acquaintances, and the next person that he had dated or whatever connection with was a Korean young lady who was a few years younger than me, but worked for a hedge fund, went to Harvard Business School. So I thought to myself, and who I didn't think was as physically attractive as I was. So, my eyes were opened.
Yes.
I thought, it was enough to just be me, but it wasn't in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of this guy that I felt that I had to prove myself in some way valuable. And that really pushed me to write Beast of a Little Land.
I love that. I love that so much. That's iconic.
Now he must feel so dumb because, he travels for work, and, Beast of a Little Land is stocked in a lot of airports around the world. And I know this because, relatives or friends or just plain readers post these airport grams on Instagram, and they'll say, this is at, whatever airport. And I just imagined to myself him going to an airport bookstore and seeing my name.
You're haunting him.
Yes, but anyway, to go back to Natalia also sees this as a way to feel vindicated and prove her worth to the rest of the world. But her motivation with regards to ballet does change. So this is primarily her motivation in the earlier stage of life. Yeah. And what drives her next as she matures as a human being will, of course, evolve.
Yeah, for sure. I just do think it's so interesting. As you were saying, I have the exact same kind of upbringing in that nobody in my family or like my family friends circle was a creative. So there was no kind of blueprint for what that lifestyle was supposed to look like, and I didn't think that was an option for me. And I think it kind of does something to you, doesn't it? You can use it as a driving force, or you can be completely deflated by it. And I think, it just does something so interesting to you. And I think, seeing her kind of trajectory and knowing that she comes from sort of nothing, and maybe not nothing, maybe that's kind of cruel, but she comes from very little, and then she really makes this sort of name for herself. It's a really inspiring journey that she goes on, but you do have to have that drive and sort of have that faith within yourself, because nobody is going to kind of give that to you. Do you know what I mean? You have to dig deep within yourself for that.
I think that's one of the themes that recurs in the novel, how, she constantly has to have her own source of inspiration and motivation. And it's not coming from somebody else's pat on the back, you're doing a good job. And again, this is also based in large part from my own experience. I really wish that somebody would have told me, Juhea, you're a good writer, maybe try this. No professor told me this. No editor told me this. People that I went to for some sort of reassurance, they largely discouraged me from writing. Even my peers, even my friends. And each time that happened, I had a choice to either believe myself or believe other people. And some of them I even liked as human beings. But I always chose to listen to myself, that I deserve to write and have this creative life. And that made the world's difference. So if you're listening to this and you get a lot of discouraging remarks, please know that those remarks speak more volumes about the speaker than
Yes.
about you. In a lot of ways, it's about their own pessimistic
Yeah,
worldview and
absolutely.
anything to do with your own ability to make it in the world.
Yeah.
So believe in yourself.
That is amazing advice. And thank God that you didn't listen
Very
to
stubborn.
yeah, good. I'm glad because this book should absolutely be in the world. I absolutely love your work and I'm so glad that you've chosen to write and ignored anybody that's kind of tried to discourage that. I can't believe somebody would have the audacity to do that, but it happens. I do want to ask, there's a moment in the book, I'm just going to end up reading quotes back to you, I'm sorry, but there's so much great writing in this book. There's a moment in the book when Natalia receives an incredible achievement, and I think this is a great jumping off point from what we were just speaking about, because she has this incredible achievement and finds that it's maybe not the feelings that she has afterwards are maybe not what she expected. And you wrote, the true cost of accomplishing something you want with your whole being is that the moment you get it, you realise it's not enough. Could you tell me a little bit about that feeling that you're describing here?
I mentioned before that the writing of City of Nightbirds overlapped with the promotion and post publication of Beasts of a Little Land. And I thought that that period would be incredible, honeymoon stage, and I would just be on cloud 9. The reality of it was that I had some incredible moments. I heard some incredible feedback right out the gates of Beast of a Little Land. I had readers who reached out to me and said, it made them cry, it broke their heart and healed them again. All the comments that I could not have dreamed of. At the same time, other things happened that really destroyed the experience for me. And there were times when I literally was curled up on my bathroom floor. You see this in films and you think,
Yeah.
why do you have to be curled up on the bathroom floor just because you're so upset? But I really literally was sprawled out on the
No.
top. This was a dark time for me. And I had to find ways to make this still worthwhile. I found the other things that fulfilled me and that made me able to go on and create other works. One of the things that really made this possible for me was I mentioned earlier reader feedback, and readers really stood by me, and it's incredible. Everybody told me once the book is out, within the first few months, you will not hear anything again about the book, and you will need to go to therapy to realize that, oh, book did not change my life. Now what? Lots and lots of novelists have told me. And on the contrary, it just kept on gaining more and more momentum the more time went on. And I heard from so many readers. And the incredible thing is, I am still doing publicity for Beasts of a Little Land. It came out in 2021 and now it's 2025. And I feel like because it came out at different points in the international markets, I'm still having to fly there and speak about the book. So my life absolutely was changed, and that was in large part due to the readers who really gave me their sincere love. And the second thing that was really important for me was being honored with Yasnaya Polyana Award. Natasha's moment of disillusionment does come after she has a similar great achievement.
Yes.
However, Yasnaya Polyana Award was incredibly healing for me because, as you mentioned earlier in the introduction, it is awarded by Leo Tolstoy Museum Estate. Yeah. And I am personally so influenced by Tolstoy and the Russian greats that it was just the biggest artistic honor that I could have dreamed of. I have always been inspired by his humanitarian legacy as well. He was a vegetarian long before his time, just as I have been vegan for the past 20 years. And pacifist as I am pacifist. So I really looked up to Tolstoy as this model of artist humanitarian that I ultimately want to be. So to be honored as carrying on his literary and humanitarian legacy by his direct descendants was incredibly surreal. But the real moment for me was not the award ceremony, but a couple days later when I went to the Tolstoy estate. The estate's name is Yasnaya Polyana, which is why the award is not called Tolstoy Award, but the Yasnaya Polyana Award. And I went there and I toured the country house, the manor home where where Count Tolstoy lived most of his life. And I even got to sit on his chair. You know, most tourists are not allowed to sit on furniture for obvious reasons. Everything has been preserved down to the smallest detail to be precisely the hour when Tolstoy passed away. So nothing has been moved. Even like the last book that he was reading, which happens to be Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, is open to the page where he was reading it before he left. So it's under a glass case. So it just feels so iconic. I'm like, again, getting shivers just remembering this. And I was led by his great-great-grandson, Vladimir Ilyich Tolstoy, to go horseback riding to the field where Levin is harvesting with the peasants in Anna Karenina, which is my favorite novel. So they asked me, Juhea, do you know how to ride horseback? And I said yes. And I was remembering to the time when I just placidly sat on top of a pony and did not like trot or anything. And I thought, of course I know how, like it's so easy. And I had done it like 3 or 4 times. Enough to know, you know, this is no problem. No, when Blackburn asked me this, he meant, can you gallop? And I thought, you know, you see a lot of actors gallop in movies like Pride and Prejudice, and you think that's easy. All the aristocrats in movies know how to do this. No, it's actually really hard. Now I have like newfound respect for people who play Mr. Darcy, because I did not know that you had to go up and down in order to avoid bumping to the horse's back.
Yeah.
This horse with like beautifully plaited and braided mane kept on looking back at me and like, what are you doing, human? You're supposed to go up and down. And I was like, sorry. I think her name was Gula. I was like, sorry, Gula, I'm hurting your back. I don't know any better. So anyway, we went to the field and it was just so incredibly beautiful. And I said to Vladimir, I said, Vladimir Ilyich, I am experiencing perfect happiness. The only thing that's keeping me from like that perfect bliss is the fact that I can't let go of the reins to take photos right now. And then he like turned his horse around like seriously like a movie person and like whipped out his phone and like took like a bunch of shots of me like in a circle. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
This is perfect. Now I can die happy. And the reason that was a perfect moment of happiness for me was that this is something that no one can take away. Like I said earlier, you're going to be misunderstood so much. Like for some really illegitimate, stupid reasons as well. Like I can't tell you just how many times, for example, for this book, readers have sometimes questioned, why are you calling Natalia Natasha sometimes? Other times you're calling her Natalia Leonova. Other times she's Natalia Nikolaevna. Like that's inconsistent. And then I was just like, okay, I'm sorry, but that's just, it's a Russian name convention. It's not a defect, but like there are a myriad of ways when you wish that you could speak up for yourself, but you're going to be misunderstood all the time. So, you know, those are really hurtful moments, but I could always look back to this moment of perfect happiness when I did not need to feel I had to validate. I didn't even need to know how to ride a horse. I didn't care that I looked silly. I was just so perfectly happy to be in that place with the history of this literary great that I admire so much, and in the setting that inspired my favorite novel. And I thought no one can take this away from me. So I think as artists, we really do need a thick skin for so many different reasons. Hannah, you're an actor and you know what it's like to go to an audition and be rejected for reasons both valid and completely absurd. Yeah. And you come home and you're like, why am I doing this? And it's the same in publishing, right? And when those discouraging moments happen, you do need something that's going to make you whole again. And I got that perfect moment. So I have something that will continue to revive me for many years going forward.
I love that so much. That's an amazing story about the horse as well. But it is an incredible achievement, you know, so congratulations. You know, you deserve to have that acknowledged and have your work acknowledged. The largest annual literary prize in Russia, like that's not for get that. It's incredible. So yeah, I'm really happy for you.
Thank you. Can I say one thing
Yeah.
to that? I am not oblivious to the fact that there is a war going on. In fact, I could sit here talking about my book, but when I read the news about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, it really breaks my heart. It's tragic. It's absolutely
Yes.
tragic. It's so much bigger than one author, one book. However, when I went there last October, I did it with a complete intention that it's artist's duty to be a bridge more than to stand for refusal. I want to be an artist that stands for connection. And this was a conscious decision. I absolutely respect an individual artist's choice to say, I no longer work in Russia as a protest against a war. And I think that's very admirable. And for me, I was doing this with a 30-year mindset. And by that, I mean, you probably know this already, Hannah, but I am an advocate, a longtime advocate now for the wild Siberian tigers and Amur leopards that only exists in the borderlands of North Korea, Russia, and China. These animals used to thrive in the Korean Peninsula from time immemorial until early and mid 20th century, respectively. And they disappeared, they were extirpated in Korea precisely due to man-made conflict. So the tigers disappeared due to Japanese occupation. And the main reason that led to the disappearance of the leopards was the final straw was the Korean War, because they really disappeared after that. So for me, my goal is to really not let these animals completely go extinct, again, due to political division and man-made conflict, which is having an impact on them right now as we speak, and especially the leopards, because there are so few individuals remaining, about 100 to 110 wild individuals. And worse than that, their genetic diversity is so low that if we don't do something now, they will be functionally extinct, meaning, they're inbreeding a lot. And if we don't do something to connect their isolated habitats now and create ecological corridors between these politically very difficult countries, we are going to lose them very soon. So I think that me going there was an active effort to create cultural and ecological diplomacy between these countries. Because again, I won an award for a book that's based in Korea, and I am South Korean born, but South Korea supported Ukraine. So technically they're at odds with Russia. So me being present there was in so many ways saying, I am going to ignore the fact that so many of my countries that I owe allegiance to are at war with your country. So it's not just a very simple bilateral situation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really hope that I can continue to be that unique person who can speak to a lot of different people just as an artist, and which gives me more access than being a politician, and say, even though politically we're divided now, this is worth saving. This is worth looking in the decades in the future, and instead of just this year or in the past 5 years we've been at war, because this is a legacy that we want to keep for our future generations of all of us. And I think that City of Nightbirds, the Russian edition, will hopefully speak to them as well. It will come out in August. And the statement that this book makes about the war and the futility and the injustice of it will hopefully speak to a lot of Russian readers.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think it really comes through, how human connection has the power to be incredibly healing. And, division isn't something that we want. We don't want to create more division. We want to find these human connections. And you do explore the world of Russian ballet in this book, but you also represent these attacks on Ukraine. And it's very apparent that you want to give voice to that. And I was about to ask you why it was important to you, but I feel like, you've been very clear on why it was so important. I don't want to give any spoilers, of course, but I think that particular storyline was a really interesting route to go down, and you handled it really well. And it shows sort of the wonderful art that comes out of Russia, but also, you don't shy away from what has happened in Ukraine and the horrifying things that have happened, and wrote that really well. I am aware of time, but I do always like to finish by asking for recommendations. Now, you did give us some recommendations up top, but I'd love to know instead what your writing influences might be, if there's any particular authors or books that have really stayed with you. I know you mentioned Tolstoy, but is there anyone else that you'd like to speak about?
You know, I have been influenced so much by 19th century Russian masters, not only Tolstoy, but, you know, I've read all of them, I feel, to varying degrees, Dostoevsky, Gogol, a bit of Pushkin. But, you know, influence-wise, I would also add Guy de Maupassant, who is known primarily as a short story writer. And I have a habit of comparing literary works to music. And if I would say the Russian greats of the 19th century wrote symphonies, I would say Maupassant reminds me very much of Schumann's more delicate pieces, like five pieces in folk melody, which is a very short, very wistful piece on the cello. And he does everything in miniature, but with no less emotional impact and pathos. So I think Maupassant is great if you are keen on short stories, and Kafka is another major influence. What I love about Kafka, and again, he's been translated into English. Well, not only that, all the Russians that I have read, I have been reading them in English. But what I loved about Kafka is that he writes very visually, and this is a characteristic of my writing as well. And if you read his sentences, he will guide your vision this way and that, and everything will just flow. It's like watching a film. And his capture of the tragedy of the human condition is just so himself. I love writers who are so uniquely, unapologetically themselves, and I think Kafka is one of them. And having said that, I think he shines more in short stories rather than in novels, the longer works. I think the longer they get, I think the more he loses his own thread. But I am also aware that even greatest artists, such as Franz Kafka, cannot possibly produce hit after hit after hit. And this is the same thing in music. J.S. Bach, the world's greatest composer. Not every single Bach piece will be a masterpiece at the equal level of certain of his best pieces. So I think I have taken a lot from Kafka. And I'm also honestly influenced a lot by Korean literature. I am not as influenced by Korean American literature, let's say. I do look more to the classic Korean literature from the 20th century. I have been compared a lot to Park Kyung-mi, who is one of the two main mountain ranges of 20th century Korean literature, the other being Cho Jung-nae. And she wrote about a 20-volume epic saga called Toji, or The Land, which was something that Beast of a Little Land was heavily compared to, and which I was very grateful for. This is like you being a debut novelist, or you, Hannah, being a relatively young actress and being compared to like Helen Mirren or someone who is an incredible icon. So I have been influenced a lot by Park Wan-seo, and she's also one of those really, really well-known Korean 20th century novelists. And I could go on, but yeah, these have really informed my sensibility, my appeal to human empathy. I think that's what I drew from all of these different literary sources. They all concentrate on empathy and pathos, and ultimately suggesting a way to be more human. And you would think that this is a common universal thing, but it's not necessarily the case, right? You know, a lot of modernist literature, postmodernist literature are not interested in that per se. Not saying that they're not valid for their own reasons, but they were not the things that I looked towards as my North Star of what I want to do as an artist.
I mean, there's an incredible list of influences, and I think especially the human empathy element is very apparent in this book. It is an incredible book, and I could have talked to you about it for hours. There are so many elements of it that I loved, and I think this is a book, I think, for anybody that works in a kind of creative role especially. But this is a book for everyone, but I think it will resonate with a lot of creatives in terms of the dedication and the sacrifice. And I just think it's a beautiful book about friendship and about relationships, and I just absolutely loved it. So congratulations on a wonderful book, Juhea. I absolutely adored it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. It was a pleasure for me to speak with you.
It was a joy to chat to you. Where can the listeners find you online?
JuheKim.com, and I'm also on Instagram at Juhe_writes.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the podcast today. I've loved chatting to you. I loved your book. And for our listeners, if you would like to grab yourselves a copy of City of Nightbirds, which why wouldn't you? You can grab yourselves one via the links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe. Go give Juhea a follow, and you can follow us via A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. That is all we've got time for. So thank you so much again for listening. Goodbye.